I'd love to try to convince our viewers that everything we do on our little corner is carefully orchestrated and planned well in advance. But sometimes we just get lucky. If this isn't the most beautiful lake on the face of the earth, I don't know where a better lake would be. I've spent a lot of my time here in the North Country promoting the people in this area and the natural beauty, and if this doesn't prove it to you, I don't know how I can. It's a nearly perfect middle of October day in 2004 on Shazy Landing in Lake Champlain. And besides the natural beauty, we got a couple of guys that are just going to talk here about the history of William Minor in the North Country and show you some architecture here that you may not have seen before. I hadn't seen before. I had no idea this place was here until I drove down here today. And I'll be thrilled to get a liberal education with you. Dave Withall, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Great to be with you here today. You are in charge of the Minor Enterprises.
Minor Enterprises in Geneva, Illinois. I'm the president, chief executive officer, chief operating officer.
And Calvin got to meet you sometime back when you made a presentation in the area, right?
Yes, I made a presentation on some of Mr. Minor's business ventures and his inventions this summer up at the Minor Heritage Center.
I think that many of our viewers have at least heard the name William Minor, but mostly the man's life has been a bit of a mystery to the average man or woman. They hear us talking about what great philanthropic things he did for this area and so on. But he did.
Mm-hmm.
And every now and again we'll do an interview with some of the old students and teachers from the Shazy School who talk about those glory days of Grey Gables and so on. But Calvin and I have been so lucky over the last few years to be able to add new chapters as time goes on, and so I'm thrilled and delighted to meet you here today, because if anybody in the world has been immersed in the life of Mr. Minor throughout their entire lifetime, it's you.
Yes, I have been, that's for sure.
How did the connection first begin?
Well, it goes back a long time to my grandfather. According to his own writings, the first time he met Mr. Minor was in 1891.
Wow.
And my grandfather was 11 years old at that point. He met him in Chicago. My great-grandfather was working for the Whipple Car Company, and my grandfather assignment for the day was to take his father his lunch pail at the Whipple Car Company, and Mr. Minor just happened to be there that day. He was probably there working on some test installation of his draft gears, and that's where they first met. Of course, my grandfather was only 11 and he really didn't know what was going on at that time, but my grandfather wound up working at the Whipple Car Company then, and worked his way up through the ranks, and eventually became a foreman out on the production line. Then he became the production superintendent, and then, as he writes, he became superintendent of the whole company, which I'm not sure what that meant exactly, but he said I even had accountants working for me at that point. Eventually the Whipple Car Company wound up being sold, though, and at that point in time, as my grandfather wrote, it just didn't look like something that he wanted to be part of. So he knew Mr. Minor, and he asked him for a job, and went with Mr. Minor then in 1914. And that's when the connection really started to be made, I guess.
And it's amazing how these things develop over the years.
Yes.
Starting from an 11-year-old boy.
Yes, 11 years old.
To where? What year would that have been? That would have been
1891.
1891.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, we're going back a
A lot of years.
You wanted history, folks. You are going to get history here today.
Yeah.
I'm just delighted to be standing out here. Oh, what is this place?
Well, this was Mr. Miner's boathouse. We're out actually standing on what we call the slip. This is where Mr. Miner had his boat, pulled into the slip, went back in under the house, which you'll see in the background there.
The Alice.
The Alice. He had two boats that we know of for sure. Both of them were able to pull into there, and they put them on big canvas slings for the winter, and they'd hoist them up and get everything out of the water, or if it was still the boating season, why they just left it in the water underneath there for protection and whatnot.
You know, we have taken our cameras to the what they call the $1 Million Dam. You've been there many times,
Oh, yes.
I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
That
That was the one that didn't work.
was the one that didn't work. But you know what? It wasn't for lack of trying.
No, it certainly wasn't.
What we've learned about hydronics and a few other things over the years have revealed what the problems were.
Yeah.
It leaked.
Yes, it did.
But what a spot.
The dam didn't leak, but the ground, the surface, the ground
The ground
leaked.
leaked, and it was...
It just wouldn't hold water.
As many things in my life have been. But Calvin and I walked up there. I had heard about it for years and never had marched back in there. And we've been up there 2 or 3 times looking over that countryside. Talk about a very special place that a lot of people did not know about.
It is. It's a very
That
special
flat
place.
rock area and that dam and what it just... For somebody to build something like that, they had to be a visionary. I guess that's the right word.
Yes, he was, very much so. And part of that vision was electrification. Now, you're going back a long time when you're thinking original electrification in this country. But he was on the cutting edge of it with his hydroelectric dams at that point.
And we had heard that here in the North Country, but he was on the cutting edge of a lot of things, and we're going to talk about that today. So how did you happen to acquire this piece of property yourself?
Well, that's kind of an interesting story. Eventually, we'll continue with a little of the history. My grandfather became president of the W.H. Miner Incorporated at that point after Mr. Miner had died. Through the graces of Alice Miner, she was chairman of the board at that point, because it was her company then, and she selected my grandfather to be president, and he stayed president until his death in 1960. And my father was active in the company at that point, and it came to a point in time due to tax laws where foundations could not own 100% of any kind of a corporation. There had to be a separation. So the foundation went its way, and my father bought W.H. Miner Incorporated at that time. And as part of the whole negotiation and part of the whole deal, we just kind of like this little piece of property, this little 4 3/4 acres here on the lake, and it wound up being part of the deal when everything separated. So that's how we came to own the place.
The building itself is so interesting.
It is.
I looked in the other end of it and saw these great steel girders, and I figured, why would that kind of architecture be in a building this small? And you said simply they needed to have them there to haul the boats out.
Yeah, you had to haul that boat up, and those boats were heavy, big old heavy mahogany and probably teak boats. They had some weight to them, and you needed some very substantial equipment to lift those things out of the water. And that's why the steel beams are inside.
I wonder if either one of those boats exists anymore. No? Yes?
I would think not. I would think not. I don't know where they would be.
They're bound to be photographs.
Oh, yes, we have photographs.
I think I've seen pictures of the Alice.
Yeah. Well, there was one before that you may not have seen. It was a very open boat. If you remember some of the old movies, of seeing small launches with a big steam plant sitting right in the center of the boat. Well, that was the first of the boats he had down here. The second one was kind of an enclosed cabin cruiser, and they were both named Alice, but That's the one I actually remember seeing. It was still around in the middle 1950s. What happened to it, I have no idea, though.
Wouldn't it be nice if it turned up somewhere?
Yes, it would.
David, how'd you like a boat? Then you'd have to go through and then open it all up again.
It'd be kind of a maintenance problem, I'm afraid.
I would imagine
Yes.
it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And why did they call it Alice? Because of Alice T. Minor, of
Alice.
course.
Mm-hmm.
And it grieves me.
William named a lot of things after his
I
wife.
bet you he did.
Yes, he did. You got Lake Alice, too.
I watched the presidential debate last night, and I would never take sides publicly. But I thought it was very interesting when the questioner asked President Bush what he's learned from his wife and his daughters, the women, because all three of the people, including the interviewer, had a wife and two daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And Bush's immediate answer, without even thinking about it, was, "I learned to listen to her."
Yes, that's true.
And I'm sure that happened
I'm sure that happened to William, too.
But it grieves me to think that that probably 90% or more of the viewers of this program have never been through that little Alice T. Minor Museum here, and what a shame. Isn't it
Well,
a neat place?
that is a neat place. There's a lot of history in there. Alice created that for her colonial artifacts of everyday life collection, and it's not a museum as such where you'll find many valuable things, although they're becoming a lot more valuable today as time goes on, but not museum pieces like you'd find fine artwork in some museums or fine furniture in other museums. What she collected were the artifacts of everyday life during the colonial period in our history, and that is the repository for it.
I just find it very tremendously charming. We enjoyed our tour there, had a relationship with the tour guide way back when.
Fred Smith.
Fred, knowing him as a small child, going to summer Methodist summer camp up near Lowville. Just, everything's tied together if you look for those connections
Yes,
in
it
the
is.
world. Well, this is tying a lot of William H. Minor's history together today, and Alice T. Minor's history coming up here. We hope to go inside and talk to you a great deal more, find out what makes you tick, and therefore what made him tick, and how we got here from there, from way back in the 1890s. It's a great story, isn't it?
We're going to talk about some of Mr. Minor's inventions and, just in general, business conditions, I think, way back then.
We'll do a little palaver, and I hope you enjoy it with us. Dave Withall, Shazy Landing, our little corner. Calvin says, now we'll find out that I'm not really 4 inches taller than Dave. Yeah, it's too bad. I like that tremendous advantage we had on the back lawn. This is the first part of the building I saw when I walked by, and I had no idea why would somebody build a garage this way. Well, the garage was kind of an afterthought, wasn't it, David?
Well, the garage was actually a place to put the Alice. They could haul it up on the hoists, and if they wanted to leave it in the slip area, they could. Otherwise, they could take it out, and probably went to Plattsburgh. I would think to the dock and coal, because that would be the only place at that time that might have had the facilities to handle a boat that size, and they'd put it on a trailer and they could put it into this garage area for the winter. So I understand it was done both ways over the years.
This has been a tremendous metamorphosis from the very beginning. I mean, you were telling us when we started that this building has been added onto and changed and altered, and
Yes.
it didn't really have much for bedrooms in the very beginning if it was a boathouse.
Well, this was a boathouse. The original version of it, which burned down, was a lot smaller, but it was 2 stories high. According to the blueprints, the top floor was the ballroom.
I laughed when you said that. The top story was the ballroom. Well, if you were William Minor, you could have a ballroom
I
on
guess
the
so.
boathouse if you
I
wanted
guess so.
to.
Uh-huh. And later on, and I don't know when, I would have to presume sometime during the 1930s or 1940s, after Mr. Minor had died, John Maslowski, who was the farm manager at that point, was responsible for adding a few small rooms on the south end of the building. And then later on, when my family started to use the building, my father and my grandfather had these 2 bedrooms actually built right over the slip, so it's not usable for boats anymore underneath there. It's there's no way to get out, in other words, because there's rooms built right over it.
I can understand that. But so this property and this building has childhood memories for you.
Oh yes, yes, definitely. When my family first started coming up to this part of the country as a family, we spent some time at Heart's Delight Cottage up on the farm, but it was decided that we just got to go someplace that was a little bit more casual, and so we wound up for the rest of our childhood years that we came up here, down here on the lake.
Are they good memories for you?
Oh yes, real good memories, yes.
What are your first memories of Lake Champlain? This place or other places?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
But your family always came up here every year, right?
Yes, we came up here, yes, every summer, and a little bit later on, frequently we would come up here for Christmas too.
No kidding?
Yes, we did. And those were good times too.
Those are the things kids remember.
Oh yes,
Summers on the lake and Christmas mornings.
Sure.
In the North Country.
Those snowstorms and whatnot in the Christmas season. For kids, that's fun though.
Of course, the great adventure while your parents are trying to get you there alive. How would you get here? Would you drive all the way?
We would either, depending on the time of the year, we would drive, or we would get on the 20th Century Limited out of Chicago and get off at Albany, and someone from up here in Chazy would drive the car down and pick us up, and we'd get here that way.
20th Century Limited, huh?
Yeah.
Memories of trains, the
Yes.
steam trains of our childhood. And of course, Minor was connected with the railroad, so it's all a
yes.
it's all a big perfect circle, isn't it?
It's
huh?
all a big circle, that's right.
I love it. Well, what do you say we go inside and get down to brass tacks here, David?
Okay, we're going to talk about Mr. Minor, the businessman.
I love it.
Okay.
We're inside, in front of the fireplace, inside the old Minor boathouse here in Chazy Landing with Dave Withall. And we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty here and talk about just some of the marvelous things William Minor did. He was quite of an incredible personality, as well as having a genius for a mind.
Yes, he was.
Just amazing. Did his fascination with how things work date way back to his early childhood? Do you know anything about that history?
We really don't. All that we know is, for sure, is his fascination and emphasis in the railroad industry came about because really that was his first job. He worked in Indiana, I believe, on the Wabash Railroad, and that's where he started to think about things.
So let's talk a little bit about some of these marvelous inventions.
Oh.
Calvin reminds us that we take things for granted. We've laid a lot of groundwork over the years in doing shows about William Minor, but in this particular program, I think it would be appropriate just to tell our viewers who William H. Minor was, what it was his connection with the North Country. So give us just a little brief.
His connection with the North Country is very logical. After his father and mother died, he and his sister were basically orphans. They had nowhere. I believe his sister was already married at that point and living in Indiana, which is how William Minor eventually wound up there. But William was sent off to live with his uncle, who was here in Chazy. And that's where the connection with Chazy began.
That makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he moved here, built this fabulous farm,
Grew up here.
and eventually, let's just talk just briefly about this wonderful farm. Some of our viewers have seen it in the past, but for those of you who may be watching this from another part of the North Country, we would welcome you over here to look over the place, because it's really kind of neat up there, isn't it?
Yes, they have a lot of display areas, the newest one being the Miner Heritage Center, which traces some of the history of Mr. Miner, or at least the local North Country portion of that history. And there's always something going on there. The Miner Farm has many programs, and so does the Miner Institute going on for the general public most any time of the year.
Well, it's part of his legacy, isn't it?
Yes, it is part of his legacy.
But he decided to do a lot of things with and for this North Country because he really was in love with the place.
He was, yes. That's why he built the Shazy Central Rural School, which was arguably the first school of its type in the country, where all of the little one-room schoolhouses were consolidated into one large building, and that's how the education system pretty much developed in the rest of the country over the years.
It was a model, at the very
was a
least,
model.
a model.
Yes, it was. Something that had never been done here in New York, and probably not even as far down as New York City either at that time.
And he did not spare the horses.
No, he put everything in that building that you could imagine. Elevators, dining rooms, had 2 swimming pools, I believe.
Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the mid-1920s, people who are familiar with this area, especially the current Champlain Valley Physicians Hospital, the old Physicians Hospital was built.
Yes, he built that hospital in 1926 for the community. And it still remains one of your great institutions here in the North Country.
You know, we've followed that, and we were pleased to do several programs during its celebration of its diamond anniversary.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
75 years, and the man's influence and her influence too are in so many corners of this North Country, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alice, of course, was the driving force behind the Colonial Collection. And once upon a time, both of them also had a great interest in the Kent Lord House in Plattsburgh. That has since terminated, and both groups went their own ways. But that's where really the museum aspect of the Kent Lord House was started, with Alice and William Miner, I believe, in 1924.
With the internet the way it is these days, if there are those people who want to learn more about the Miners family, their contributions to the North Country, there are a number of websites that talk about the Miners and what they did. And before we finish this program today, we're going to learn a great deal more too. All right, we've set the scene, David.
Okay.
Let's talk about the inventions.
Let's talk about Mr. Miner, the businessman, and his inventions. Calvin, can you get a good shot of this?
Sure.
It's kind of small, but I think we ought to at least start by talking about what it is that I'm going to be talking about, and that's parts for railroad cars, and some of the things that Mr. Miner invented. This is obviously a cutaway type diagram of a railroad car. Here's the coupler. Here's a handbrake. Right in here is the draft gear and the yoke around the draft gear. You cannot see it underneath this, on this particular diagram, but there are also side bearings. Before I get any further, I know there is a terribly mistaken impression around this part of the world that Mr. Miner invented the railroad coupler, and he did not. He invented an improved draft gear that greatly enhanced the shock absorption capability of railroad cars, or of draft gears in those days for railroad cars. But he actually had absolutely nothing to do with the coupler.
The coupler itself.
No, he invented an improved draft gear. Okay, let's go to another diagram then. Okay, this is the truck assembly they call it. These are the wheels that the railroad car rolls on. Some of the parts that Mr. Miner actually invented and Miner made, and we still make them. Side bearings. There's two side bearings to a car. He made bolsters. This is what ties the side frames together on the truck assembly. And of course the wheels and whatnot. He had nothing to do with the wheels or anything like that. In this diagram it would be side bearings and bolsters.
Oh, we talked about the fact that he was very well educated. How did he get his education?
At one point in time, as the history books are written, he spent some of his life in Minnesota, and with I believe it was the Prey Manufacturing Company. These were in his learning years. It was a railroad business, but during this time, he took business school courses in the evenings. And he also went to the University of Minnesota and he studied engineering there. So this is where he received his higher education in the state of Minnesota.
And do you think he just started noodling with these things right from the very beginning, or did he,
He had some experience in the railroad field already. And I think it was pretty evident to anybody working in the business that time, at least if you believe what the history books tell you, that things were kind of in a state of flux in the railroad business, in that railroad cars were getting bigger and hauling more and more cargo, but there was also being a lot more damage done because of inadequate shock absorption on railroad cars. And
think of the forces involved, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. If you think about what was a shock absorber on a railroad car, and I might as well use one of my models right now.
Sure.
Not to illustrate anything in particular. If you visualize a coil spring this size, this is what passed as a shock absorber. I only use this because it was this size. I'm going to talk about this actual unit a little bit later. But there was a coil spring, and this was your shock absorption in the railroad cars back in those days. And it was not adequate. There was a lot of damage being done to the cargoes.
You mean just backing up to the
Just
car,
in train
coupling?
operation.
Yeah.
It was probably as much in the coupling as just over the tracks. A lot of damage being done, and millions of dollars of damage being done back in those days, which would equate to who knows, hundreds of millions of dollars today.
So he saw a need.
There is a need. Yes, there was a very definite need. Mm-hmm.
And his first major invention?
The first major invention. Let's get some more papers out here.
Yeah, sure.
Was the Miner tandem spring draft gear, which I have a copy of the patent here. This was his first patent. It issued on October 20th, 1891.
Oh my goodness.
Calvin, can you get a good picture of that?
Sure.
Okay, the particular features of what he invented were, remember I talked about one spring of something that was that size. Well, now he's got two springs here. And not only does he have two springs, and it's very difficult to see, but he's dropped another smaller spring inside the coils of each one of the bigger springs. So now you have not only doubled the capacity, you've probably 2.5 times, maybe even 3 times the capacity of the shock absorption. And this was primarily his invention. If you look at this, and for those engineering folks out there, well, you're going to say, well, this doesn't do anything. All it does is make one longer spring. But that's not what happened. Mr. Miner, by using side castings within the pocket, he actually created two pockets. So each one of these spring sets would act independently of each other. So not all in one long big unison spring. And in order for this whole mechanism to work, he also invented a yoke that would go around it. And the yoke had little castings on it, or nubs, and the original one, it was pins where you could actually pick up these springs as separate units, and everything would not work as one. What was in the center here of the side casting actually divided off this pocket area and made it two separate pockets because there was a solid piece in here. So the idea of the two springs and the isolation of two separate areas within the pocket itself was his invention. And this greatly increased the capacity and what was available for capacity on a railroad car.
Did he have trouble selling this to the industry?
No. Actually, and here's some of the fun part for a businessman such as myself. You look at this and you say, okay, that's well and fine, he's got a great invention here, but did it sell? And by the end of 1930, Mr. Miner incidentally died early in 1930, but here was a summary one of the people in the Miner sales department did of many things. There had been 3,923,834 Cannon spring draft gears sold.
Well, I guess you might.
So I guess it sold pretty good.
I think so.
And this was actually his greatest invention, probably, as far as sales are concerned, and one of those that we will always remember.
You know, sometimes Rube Goldbergs get together and make little inventions that go nowhere, you know.
That's right, and he had a few of those too. I'm going to talk about those. Oh yes, he had some that didn't sell.
He saw this tremendous need here. This is his first major invention, and
it was
probably what he's best known for.
Yes, it is.
Was it changed a lot over the years? You mentioned the 1930s. This was designed in 1891.
This was designed in 1891. There's two types of draft gears. This particular one that he worked with was an all-spring draft gear. There were friction draft gears also known at that point in time, and actually the friction draft gear was invented by a fellow named George Westinghouse before the spring draft gear was invented.
Just to drop another fairly familiar name.
Well, yes, that's the same George Westinghouse.
Yes, it sure is.
As the story goes, George Westinghouse was not making enough money quick enough in the railroad business, so he went to electrical stuff.
And the rest, as they say.
The rest is history. But that company still is around, Westinghouse Air Brake, and at that time they also made draft gears and were one of Mr. Miner's competitors. One of his very effective competitors too. Something else I'd kind of like to point out here in this diagram. What you see here is the coupler end down on the bottom here. This is 1891, remember. In 1891, there really were no couplers as you would associate it with a railroad car today. What this was is inside of this housing was a V-shaped slot. And railroad cars were coupled by backing them together, and hopefully these ends coming close enough, and the brakeman would slip an oval ring in there between the two on both railroad cars, and this hole here, he'd drop a pin down there. And that's what coupled up a railroad car. That's what passed for a coupler in those days. There was a problem with that too, because it was not only dangerous, but with almost no standards in the railroad industry at that point in time, how big is this thing supposed to be? You know, how big is the receiving slot supposed to be for that ring? How high is it supposed to be off the rill? Well, okay. That's why the standards organization came to be came into being at that. It was actually before that. But it was called the Master Car Builders. Mr. Miner was a master car builder. It later became the American Railway Association, and it was a standards organization. Now it's the Association of American Railroads at this point in time. But it's a big industry standards organization where all of these things are hashed out and settled. Okay, let's go on to...
All right, we gave Calvin's shoulder a rest, and we asked a couple of questions here that Calvin, it entered Calvin's mind. When we were outside beginning this program, you were talking about a car company. Was it the Whipple Car?
The Whipple Car Company.
Now, you didn't mean automobiles, you meant railroad cars.
That's
Just
right.
to clarify that for the viewers,
Mm-hmm.
so
Railroad
we
cars.
have a little perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And Calvin's next question was, and you found that very interesting because you've thought about it, who was William Miner working for when he made this invention?
Good question, and I'm really not sure that I know. I suppose I could make an argument that he was working for three people at the time. Himself, because he was out promoting his draft gear, his brand new invented draft gear. He was working for the Hutchins Refrigerator Car Company, which was a Detroit company. Miner had made the association of Mr. Hutchins, and we knew that he had to be working for them in some form or other, because if you take the 1895 copy of the Car Builders Cyclopedia, which was the publication of the Master Car Builders, Mr. Miner is listed as the Master Car Builder for Hutchins. But on the other hand, he was actually also working for the California Fruit Transportation Company. They were transporting fruits and vegetables from California through Chicago. A lot of the cargo stopped in Chicago, but it also went on to New York City too. Mr. Miner was in charge of keeping track of the fleet, making sure the refrigerator cars got where they were supposed to be and when they were supposed to be, so the lading could be put on them at the right time. And that was quite a project. When you think about it, you didn't have cell phones in those days, and the mail was very good. But maybe the phone system wasn't so good either. So you spent a lot of time out there looking around in railroad yards for your fleet of railroad cars, and that's where it is. So I don't know who Mr. Miner was working for. It might have been three people, including one of them being himself.
I'm sure he worked for himself. That's fairly obvious from what you've said. This man was very bright, industrious. Mm-hmm. He knew. It's like so many people who are successful. He saw the need, and he filled the need.
Yes, he did.
But he did that throughout his entire lifetime, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So what was next?
Well, here's another invention. This was a coupler centering device. Actually, Calvin, if I turn it sideways like this, it might be a little bit better. What does a coupler centering device do? Well, it just as the name implies, it puts the coupler in the center of the car, so you can easily couple with the next car. Why do we have need for this? Well, there isn't a need for this today. In fact, I had a hard time. Nobody in our company remembers a coupler centering device, even seeing one. It's such an old concept, but I guess back in those days there was a need for this. Let's see, I don't know if I've got any information on whether that device was a good seller. Yeah, over the product life of the product, I guess he sold just about 3,000 of them. So it was not a terribly successful thing, but I guess there must have been a need for it out there on some railroad cars.
And that was in 1905 when that patent was granted.
This is a 1905 patent. So once again, you'd mentioned that he saw needs, and
But you can understand why the misconception about couplings and William Miner was developed over the years, because he was very much involved with that kind of thing.
well, the draft gear and the coupler
Yeah.
go together, one end to the other is the way it amounts to. Yes, very much so. But he did not invent the coupler. So
Okay, I'm glad we straightened that out today. But he did work on a lot of things, didn't he?
he did. Like I say, some more successful than others. Let's see what's in here next.
You didn't steal the idea from somebody else.
No,
No, he didn't
Correct.
steal the idea from anybody else. Mr. Miner was a real thinker and a gifted and talented engineer, and a very gifted and talented businessman also. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum now. Here is something that he designed with one of his co-engineers in the company. In fact, John O'Connor was a rather remarkable man, a very prolific inventor. He worked for Miner, but as far as we know, John O'Connor, there's only one man in the country that has more patents than John O'Connor did, and that is Thomas Edison. Here's a joint patent between both of them. They were working on railroad ties. Railroad ties are wood. Occasionally, some people may see concrete ones around. At my presentation this summer, somebody said they actually saw a steel railroad tie around, which I've never seen in my life. But here between Miner and O'Connor, they developed a steel and wood railroad tie. For what reason is beyond me. I really don't know. But I don't have to consult my sheet to tell you how many of them were sold, and that's absolutely none. So at least here he perceived a need, and they, along with one of his fellow inventors and fellow engineers in the company, they invented something, but it never went anywhere.
I take it that William H. Miner did not keep a very careful journal, and none of his biographers have really delved into what he conceived as a need for the things that weren't successful. But he must have seen some need somewhere.
Oh yes. The trouble with most of the histories, I think of Miner, is that very few of them actually deal with the business end of his life. Most of them, I think, were written by people in this part of the world or with connections to this part of the world, and those people just don't know about the business end of Mr. Miner.
Maybe you better start writing.
Well, I'm thinking about it.
It's time.
Yeah, it's time, huh? Here's another one. I talked about bolsters. This was actually, Mr. Miner invented this one too. There were several bolsters that were designed by the Miner engineers over the years, but this particular one was actually Mr. Miner. You can see it in there. And maybe I should go back to my original diagram there.
I'm going to hold that for you. Got it.
It
Okay.
was, can you get this, Kelvin, okay?
Well, sure.
This is the bolster, the cross piece here,
Okay, I got you.
that tied the two side frames of the truck assembly together.
Was that welded or?
Back in those days, I have a feeling that everything was probably just kind of notched and slid in there. There's things in our old files that seem to indicate that, but it's really too far back. and this kind of a design of a bolster really is so antiquated and old by our standards today that nobody knows anymore.
So you don't know if if there are really any working copies of this.
Well, let's see. Did he sell any bolsters? No, I guess he never did sell a bolster.
So there you go.
So there's another one that wasn't terribly successful.
But part of the history. Let's pause a minute. We paused briefly for a phone call. Now let's go on with the show, David.
Okay. The next patent drawing I've got here is for a yoke, which is what, and I'll show you a little bit later model of a yoke. But basically, this is where the draft gear goes into the yoke, and it attaches to the shank of the coupler. So this is a very necessary piece. This particular one that Mr. Miner invented himself is most unusual in that it's a fabrication. It's not something that was cast at a foundry. It was actually stamped out of some kind of sheet stock, which must have been a real project in those days, because I don't know what kind of stamping presses and whatnot were available in 1916 to do this type of work. I obviously they had to have something, so probably by a combination of heating and stamping presses of some kind, they created a yoke, or at least this particular yoke. Most of the yokes were and still are castings. Let's see, the yoke, at least up through 1930, Miner had sold 92,000 yokes. A lesser product, but still a very successful one.
So you think that this was a design that he sold that many of?
It could have been.
Yeah.
It very possibly could have been. Probably more of what he sold probably had to do with the tandem spring draft gear, though. Yokes. This particular yoke would be for friction draft gear, and I'll show you that on the model a little bit later. Remember, I said there were two types of draft gears: the spring draft gear and the friction draft gear. Okay, we'll go on then.
All right, what have we got here?
Okay, moving on to another product that Mr. Miner actually invented himself. This is a roller side bearing. Now, we go back to my original sketch here, which seems to have disappeared all of a sudden. There we go.
I got this.
Okay. The side bearings, you can see them here and here. There are two on each truck. For a railroad car. The function of a side bearing in those days was the body of the railroad car as it would tip and move down the tracks. You'd get tipping action. You'd go around a corner, the body would tip. The side bearings would only allow that tipping action to go so far and lessen the possibility of the whole car tipping over for whatever reason. The action would be modified by these particular side bearings, and which is why the roller is in there too, because you've got the truck moving underneath the car like this. Side bearings perform a different function today. We still make side bearings, but the function they perform today is they're in constant contact with the body of the car. They mount exactly the same place on the bolster, but you're in constant contact with the body of the car, and we call them constant contact side bearings. What this does is basically it eliminates truck hunting. As your truck is going down the tracks and the wheels tend to shimmy, people probably, some of the old timers remember automobiles, how they'd shimmy. Well, this takes up some of that and does not allow the truck to shimmy on the track as much, and reduces the wheel wear immensely.
Things, as you pointed out when the camera was on or off, I can't recall now, are a lot different when you're making things for railroads and railroad cars because of this massive size and weight, especially for freight cars, right?
Yes, yes. Back in Mr. Miner's day, well, back at least back far as I can remember, I don't remember anything smaller than a 50-ton railroad car. Now that would be something that would carry a cargo of 100,000 pounds. I'm sure in Mr. Miner's day and when he started, the railroad cars were a lot smaller, but I don't really know how much smaller. There's information available, but we haven't really researched that so much. Today, very typically, most railroad cars are 100-ton. In other words, you'll have 200,000 pounds of commodity on that railroad car, and added to that the weight of the car, which might be another 25, 30,000 pounds. So you're talking about a fully loaded railroad car of moving a whole lot.
And that's why there are these extreme forces involved and why you have to have these
Right.
massive, powerful gears and things to hold them, yeah. But I'm sure until we began talking here today, people didn't stop to think about the tipping action.
Right.
And the wiggling action and so on. But there's motion. Railroad tracks.
It's definitely a
Railroad tracks aren't perfect.
no.
Yeah.
It's definitely there's a need out there, and side bearings do perform a function, even though what it is today is different than what it used to be.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the side bearings. If you add all of these up of the various different varieties of side bearings that were in the Miner product line, this will just being one of them that Mr. Miner actually invented himself. I'm looking at sales of about 1,764,000 side bearings up through 1930. So here was a real winner again, this particular product.
It's amazing, and this is a story that hasn't often been told. So I'm delighted that you're here with us, David, today to pass along. Some people watched your presentation, but many more people will get the information through what we're doing here today. I keep moving the microphone so we can get it in front of us here.
Okay.
What's next?
Well, what's next? Here's kind of a laugher, I like to call it. Calvin, I'm going to put this in here sideways. This is a bumper for the end of a railroad track, so the railroad car doesn't go careening off the end and who knows where.
Makes sense?
What you have here is a very monstrous hunk of concrete.
He loved the concrete.
Oh yes, reinforced with all kinds of steel plates, and a pocket within this area right here where you would conveniently slip a minor friction draft gear.
Of course. That'd be a good place for it.
Once again, this particular item, I don't have to look a whole lot further than on the sheet because he never sold any of them.
Oh, he didn't, huh?
No. However, there was a reason for him inventing this and actually getting a patent on this, because about 2 years later, this same bumper shows up in another patent, which is an entire test track assembly where you test railroad cars. Here's your big old bumper over here with a draft gear in it. Here's a railroad car impacting, and what they're doing is they're actually testing draft gears, I am sure, on that railroad car through instrumentation. All mechanical instrumentation probably too, back in those days. There weren't many electronics, let's put it that way. Here's a mechanical chart reader. Yeah, that's all part of the patent. So I think this was something that he really invented for himself and for his own company use. So.
Well, it makes sense. Why not?
Uh-huh.
Once again, he saw the need, and we have all kinds of testing devices for automobiles, but we've seen those big concrete abutment things at the ends of railroad tracks and rail yards.
Mhm.
They just didn't put the device in there, right, to act as a bumper? I don't know.
You might say that Mr. Miner tended to over-design things, and probably overbuilt.
You
It
think
was
so?
it was something. Although if you put it in the context of a test track, that's why he designed something like that, because I don't think in those types of situations you can necessarily predict what's liable to happen. So you want to stop that railroad car at the end and make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And you probably got people around there too. So you don't want anybody to get hurt by a railroad car flying off the track.
True.
Here is another interesting patent. This was for a handbrake that Mr. Miner invented himself. Let's go back to my original diagram. This particular one, it shows it on the railroad car.
What year did he die again?
1930.
There you go.
Now you're picking up something. This particular patent was filed and it issued after Mr. Miner's
I
death.
thought so.
Yes, this was his last patent. Patent number 85 on
for
his
that
on his
reason, if for
personal
no
list.
other. Yeah.
Yes, this was filed after he died, but he hadn't invented it. It's all in the records.
Is that something that was actually used, do you think?
I have a feeling that this was the forerunner of his high-powered handbrake line. He and the Miner engineers didn't really work on handbrakes as such. The original handbrake business was just bought out from another fella, an inventor, and in 1916, and this is where the handbrake started in the Miner product line. But as railroad cars got bigger, you had to improve your handbrakes, and this was Mr. Miner's shot at it, his last shot, of course.
So did every car have a handbrake?
Every car has one handbrake on it,
Even today?
even today. It's there somewhere.
I'll be darned. You know, who would think about that? I wouldn't think about it. I can remember seeing the old handbrakes on the old cars when I was a very small child.
This particular handbrake, you can even tell the vintage of it, because this handbrake is made to go on the side of a railroad car.
Sure.
And you turn it like this. The oldest ones were vertical, and you turned them like this. But
And I
by
remember,
today's standard, those were kind of Mickey Mouse. I guess they actually did a job, but on a very small railroad car. But the whole concept just wouldn't handle.
Fortunately,
the
I've
loads
never had
today.
to see one being used.
Well, you probably wouldn't see a handbrake being used because there's really not much reason for a handbrake anymore, except when that particular railroad car might be on a siding or in a rail yard. Then you'll set the handbrakes so the car can't move from where it was. Outside of that, though, in train action, everything is done with the air brake system on the railroad cars in the actual over-the-road track usage.
It's fascinating because we're talking about pretty much the heyday of railroading that Miner was involved in, and that's why he was so successful. This was big business. We've run the gamut of talking about moving things up and down waterways, and you know, we had the Secretary of State in town in real time yesterday when we're doing this in October of 2004, writing a check for the city of Plattsburgh and talking about how back in the old days, 90% of the population lived within 25 miles of a waterway because we did things on the water, and we've talked about transporting goods up and down Lake Champlain through the canal system.
Yes.
And then with the advent of railroads, we're tying the history of this North Country together because railroads are so much involved in.
Railroads were very much involved in this part of the country too. I know in looking at some of the old files before Shazy Central Rural School even existed, Mr. Miner and George Mott who was the first principal there. I guess he was the principal. They were investigating how to get the students from these outlying rural areas into Chazy, and they were thinking railroads, because the railroad network in this North Country was a lot more extensive than it is now. All you've got right now is the one line, but back then there was a lot more than that. It turned out they settled on motor buses, but they were investigating. They were looking at all the avenues at that point in time.
Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen photographs up at the minor farm of horse-drawn school buses.
Horse-drawn school buses, yeah, and he had motor buses too. There were 3 of them in the fleet, as I remember seeing.
Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. All right, next.
Okay, why don't we take a quick break here, and I'm going to get set up here with my different models.
All right, let's do it. You don't have to take this sitting down. So we're standing up, and we're going to get into the models.
Okay. We've been talking about the tandem spring draft gear pretty much exclusively for a while. But what was neat about that concept was not only the 2 isolated pockets and the 2 springs, but the whole idea led itself to something else that you could do, and that was put an insert in there. This is actually a friction draft gear, about the size of the spring package that would go into that tandem spring draft gear. Now you've got a friction draft gear, a greatly increased capacity. This particular item that I'm showing you is actually a snubber, which goes in the truck assembly in a different place, but his cartridge inserts for the tandem spring draft gear looked exactly like this and were almost exactly the same size.
No kidding.
So here you've got the old tandem spring draft gear with its limited capacity, although it doubled at least what was there before, maybe even tripled. Well, here you're talking about doubling it and tripling it again, the capacity, and still using the tandem spring draft gear by simply buying a cartridge insert.
So is that something that's not something that would be used today? Or what?
No, this was the cartridges were really just a way of extending the life of the tandem spring draft gear by making it not just a spring draft gear anymore, but a spring friction draft gear with greatly increased capacity. Your coupling speeds, we've got some old test movies.
Oh, you do? I bet
Yeah.
that's neat.
Yeah, well, we're just trying to get it together now. We actually had to send some of it out to Hollywood because it was 35 millimeter, and we don't have any way to handle 35 millimeter film, and get them to transfer it onto a DVD for us, or a CD, or not a CD, but a VHS tape. But anyhow, where was I?
Who knows? We're talking about whether to use them today and so on, but that's a very interesting model. What else?
Okay, on the old movie footage, I think the point that I wanted to make was you've got a lot of capacity questions when you're dealing with draft gears. A steel spring draft gear is good for coupling speeds up to maybe 2 miles an hour. You're talking friction draft gears. Now you're up to 6 miles an hour, at least in these earlier tests. And I say earlier tests, I'm talking back into the 1930s. Your coupling speeds are even higher today. But that has a meaning in train operations and yard operations in the railroad industry. Of course, there's an emphasis on speed, handling everything quicker. You have to watch that, though. You don't want to damage the cargo inside or damage the railroad car. Railroad cars are expensive, and frequently so is commodity within them. Okay? I'm going to pick up a couple of more models here. These are little side bearing models. I don't know if either of these are ones that Mr. Miner in particular invented. He himself, he did invent side bearings, as I showed you before. I don't know if that particular patent applies to either of these, but these are little models that, as I understand it, the salesman used to carry a whole suitcase full of these types of things around. So,
Okay.
a little bit of weight there, but
Yeah,
if that's the way they had to do it, I guess that's what they had to do.
sure.
Okay, let's go look at my big model here now. Imagine that this is the underframe and the end of a railroad car. You can see the coupler there sticking out on one end. Just imagine a big box over the top of this, and that's your railroad car. Let's take this apart. You know what, I'll do the same thing I did at my presentation this summer. Miner didn't have anything to do with couplers, so let's get rid of that. Okay?
Sure.
What scale would this be?
Oh, gosh, Kelvin. Pretty small. I don't know what the scale is. I don't think there was any particular scale when we had these built. I don't even know when this one was built. This has been around ever since I can remember. This particular
How big
one.
would the real one be?
A real draft gear and an end frame? Well, your draft gear is going to be about yay high by yay, so that's got to fit into an end frame of the car. You pull out the cross pin here, which is not cooperating. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. Then we can start pulling parts out. Something that's interesting, Mr. Miner never took credit for it, but it shows up in one of his patents, although he never claimed it. But he really invented the interface between the coupler here, which I took the shank and kept it, and the yoke, how to do that. His particular drawings, if you go back to his original 1891 patent, showed two bolts or two pins going through here. The next patent, it shows a cross key, like this type of a thing. He never claimed invention on it, but he's actually the one that invented it. The key goes in there, and then that holds the coupler to the yoke. Now, what is a yoke? Follower plates in front. This one doesn't have one in back. But what you want to do here, couplers are expensive. So you don't want to have your draft gear banging right against the back shank of the coupler. So you put this big hardened steel plate in between the end of the shank of the coupler and your draft gear head. And this can be sacrificed because this is a relatively inexpensive piece. Remember, I talked about there's two kinds of draft gears. Miner worked mainly on his tandem spring draft gear, which was springs only. This is a friction draft gear. You've got your cylinder inside of there. You can't see it probably on camera, but there's steel springs in there. But up on the end here, and this is the critical thing, you've got friction elements, shoes that scrape against the inside of the housing, and it's all activated by a central shoe. And this one seems to be jammed at the moment, which is why I was having trouble getting it out of the model. But anyway, this goes down, and you create friction in there, and this greatly increases the capacity of what you're talking about draft gears. Over steel spring draft gears, just plain steel spring draft gears, you put a friction clutch on the front of this, you're talking 5-6 times the amount of capacity potential. In fact, you're talking about so much increased capacity potential, now you're worried about the steel, the tensile strength of the steel. and how much the steel will actually take, how much the springs will actually take. In other words, now you're pushing the envelope of what the materials will allow you to do. And this is why when you're taking your product to a foundry to have these parts cast, or to a forger to have them forged, you're having to look at somebody that knows their business, because as I say, you're pushing the envelope on materials here, and if it isn't done right, you're going to have steel failure.
But all railroad cars today have to have a draft gear.
All railroad cars have 2 draft gears, one on each end.
Aha. And
Unless you're talking the like 3-pack or 5-pack type draft gear, or railroad cars, where you'll have one car basically solid coupled to another railroad car, but they'll come in groups of 3 or 5. You'll
that's
see
a 3-pack or 5-pack.
right.
Okay,
You'll see this mostly in the container cars, or the trailer on flat car type arrangements. These will be 3-packs or 5-packs, and they're solid in there. I say solid in that there's no shock absorption between these. The ends of the railroad cars actually share a set of trucks, and that's how they make it work. Of course, you have to have enough to pivot, because you can't have a railroad car so long it won't go around corners. But when you get this type of a situation, that's even nicer for people like me, because then you have to put higher capacity draft gears yet in the end of those units, and that's better business for us. So we may sell less, but the ones we're selling are more expensive. So
that makes perfect sense. All right, let's pause for a moment and we'll continue this great program. While the camera wasn't on, we started talking about how many of these great old movies still exist. Some that maybe have not been discovered by you or the public yet, and we hope to have this time of discovery in the future. But we do have some stuff already processed, don't we, Dave?
that's right. This is about a 1-hour-long production movie of the A79X draft gear being built at the Pratt & Letchworth Foundry in Buffalo, New York. It's kind of interesting how I came across the existence of this movie, and it was when I was going through some of the old back issues of Our Inheritance magazine.
Which was, you told me what
Which
that
was
was. Tell the public.
a publication that was put out by the Shazy Central Rural School for many years, and it would be 5 or 6 times a year the magazine would come out, and they would just talk about things going on in school. It had some of the intramural sports scores in there, things about different assembly programs. Mr. Miner always took the lead article in the magazine and expounded upon many different philosophical things that he was greatly interested in. But in the November 1928 issue, during one of the assembly programs, and a review of the assembly programs, they talk about a minor draft gear movie, which, that surprised me.
Sure.
And I don't know, I guess I must have mentioned it to somebody in the office, and lo and behold, about 3 days later, I get a phone call from one of my guys in the testing group, and he says, "Yeah, we got that movie. What do you want to do with it?" I says, "I'd like to see it. I didn't even know it existed." So it turned out the particular movie happened to be on 35 millimeter. Which is why he was asking me, what do you want to do with it, because we don't have any way to handle 35 millimeter movies. So what we did was we sent it out to Hollywood and had some experts work on it there and transfer it to a format that we could deal with, which was a VHS tape or a DVD today. And but that's the story of how I even knew that this movie existed. It was in our archives, and somebody knew it was there, but I didn't know it was there.
Don't you love it that you finally did come up
Yeah.
with it? So that's what we're going to look at parts of today. So let's get it going and talk about it. I think this is so great.
I've got a lot of people in my company thinking about some of this old historical information that's there, because once it gets beyond our generation, it's probably going to be gone, and even if we do find it, nobody's going to know about it, what it is anymore.
That's why we do this show.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess we're going to talk about
Let's do it.
the movie.
Right to the left of that is where you hit
there's
play.
there's the play,
You got it.
and this is once again the Miner A79 steel friction draft gear.
Highest achievement. There it is.
And there's a
There it is.
picture of the draft gear. It's interesting, this particular draft gear, there's another one in our catalogs that's also labeled an A79 draft gear, and it looks completely different.
Oh boy.
This one's a 2-shoe model, and it's the one we've got in the catalog is a 3-shoe model, so we're not quite sure what they were doing back then. The first pictures you see, the film here, this is just an overall shot of the outside of the Pratt & Letchworth foundry. Now,
Now, this is a foundry that was owned by miners?
no, I don't know that it was. I don't think so, that Mr.
You think
Miner.
They
But Mr. Miner was at one time chairman of their board of directors.
well, that makes sense.
Probably because if he didn't own it, which there's nothing that says he did, we don't have any evidence to that, but we do have a lot of evidence that he was at the worst of times 60% of that foundry's business. So at other times maybe 100%.
There was a certain marriage there, let's say.
So I guess that's maybe why they made him chairman of the board of directors. Okay, let's fast forward here. I don't know, did I fast forward? This is a shot of the overhead crane with a magnet on it, picking up scrap steel out of the scrapyard. You think recycling is something new today, or a recent vintage? Well, they were doing it in 1928. Okay, let's... Whoa, we're going awful fast there. What they're doing in this particular footage is they're charging one of the open hearth furnaces. In other words, all the scrap went into that particular bin, and now they're putting it into the actual furnace. Let's see, I hope I didn't go too far there. Here's another one. You see that device there over on the right-hand side? It looks to me like that had to be the forerunners of what we call fork trucks these days. It certainly was something that was like it. And they're dumping the bin full of scrap steel into the open hearth furnace. When I did my tour of duty at the Pratt & Letchworth foundry for about a month between college semesters, they didn't use open hearth. They used all electric furnaces at that point in time. In this shot there,
all on the coal, huh?
that's not coal that they're putting in there. That's something to adjust the chemistry of the steel.
Oh, no kidding.
I don't know what it is exactly. The next footage here, this is really neat. This is showing actual melting steel inside an open hearth furnace. And back then, I'm not sure what kind of technology they would have used to get footage like that, movie footage. But they were doing it.
Yeah, this is, boy, talk about historical material, huh?
You think 1928 and how backward people were. Well, maybe they weren't as backward as you might think they were.
Well, there was a lot of
They
good
were using
technology.
pretty good technology. By today's standard, it might seem antiquated, but they had some pretty good technology back then. Okay, let's fast forward here. There's the actual steel
Wow.
bubbling inside of that open hearth furnace. Okay, here. Is that the... There's the play there. In this footage, what they're doing is they're taking some test samples out of that heat of steel. You can see the little ingots that they have there, and now they're going into the laboratory for chemical analysis to be sure that the composition of the steel is right. There's 3 guys there with all their scientific instruments. This is one thing that was always terribly important to Miner, and it has been right up until today, and we still emphasize the same thing and you must test at all stages of production to be sure you get a quality product. And here's proof of where it started back in at least 1928. Here's an interesting one. They're stretching that piece of steel to test its tensile strength. You watch what happens here in a second. You can see it's starting to get skinnier in the middle, and pretty soon you're going to see that piece of steel break. But in the meantime, they've recorded the forces that are necessary to do that on some type of an instrument. And
Imagine what force that must be to stretch that metal, huh?
You're probably talking a few million pounds of force there. You can see it's getting pretty skinny there in the middle. There it goes. Okay, now we'll fast forward to another section. Oops, wrong button. Okay. In this part of the movie, let's see. Oh, what they're doing is they're making the center core for the mold, and I went forward just a little bit too much there, but you'll be able to see with the next one as they put it together. See, that's the inside portion of an A79, so you only get the cylinder on the outside. You don't get one solid big blob of steel. See him putting the sand into the mold and packing it down.
These guys are doing a day's work, aren't they? Maybe they know the camera's on?
Well, possibly.
Wow, look at this. It's like assembly line production.
Yeah, now over on the right side there, what they're doing is making the bottom and the top of the mold. You saw them making the core portion of the mold before. But this is the drag. They're going to make the drag in this. This is kind of boring, so we'll just look at this real quick. But they put sand in there. This is the bottom portion of the mold. The actual full mold is 2 halves that you pour the molten steel into. Now we'll fast forward that. Oops, didn't go. Okay, now in this section, they're making the cope, which is the top half of the mold. And you can see them putting the sand in there. The white.
Is this factory still in operation?
No, this is long gone, this foundry. The white thing sticking up in the middle there, that's where the steel, the molten steel, is actually poured into the mold. Okay, we'll fast forward through that portion now. This next section, they're actually tapping that open hearth furnace. Kind of looks like a place that I don't think I'd want to be standing when that steel comes out of there, but there's two men that are standing there. And that's going down into a pot, a big pot underneath the floor there. You'll see them.
I don't know what the OSHA regulations were in those days, but those guys are standing on boards that were going up and down.
That's exactly right. I was just going to say here, they're going to take the boards away across the open pit there. But that's a cauldron of molten steel there. I think what worries me more is all those sparks and flame and everything flying around all over the place. And you are absolutely right. That wouldn't even come close to passing an OSHA inspector. And there's the other furnace being tapped right there.
It's amazing, wonderful footage, isn't it?
It is. All right, we're going to fast forward here again.
Making sure they sift all the sand.
Okay, now in this footage we are back to casting of draft gear parts. In this case it was wedges that they're making the molds for. I'm just going to fast forward through this. It's an interesting study if you like to see men working hard, which is exactly what's happening there. Let's see. Now here's some interesting footage. They're actually going to start pouring this metal. Those were one of the big cauldrons that was down under the floor level there when you saw the furnace being tapped. Now watch what happens. The man with the long lever there, he opens up the pot, the spigot on the bottom of the pot, and you're pouring draft gear cylinders.
One at a time.
One at a time. And that's the way you do it today, too. Or at least you probably would do it that way. This is awfully large equipment for you to be able to automate it and have several different stations pouring at the same time without duplicating the equipment. But there you have it. That's pretty much the entire casting process. Let's go fast forward here again. See, what are they doing right here? Okay, now those are finished cylinders. Or I wouldn't say finished, but they are as they came out of the molds. They just load them all into one big tub and they haul them off to the finishing area.
Let's see if there's some good footage here on the finishing area. Okay, I talked about the risers. That's where the molten steel is actually poured into the mold. But that also fills up with steel then too and hardens. The men there are hitting the cylinders with sledgehammers to knock all the refractory sand off of them. And there's a man with a cutting torch. He's cutting that riser out of there. And that'll go back out into that scrap yard you saw at the very beginning, and that'll get reused again, maybe in another draft gear cylinder. This is not a very interesting part of the movie, but the proper heat treating and annealing of the steel parts is absolutely critical in the manufacture of draft gear steel. Unless it's done right, you have X number of pounds of steel junk. You have to have the surface hardnesses on the metal in order for a draft gear to function properly. And there you see the cylinders actually going into the annealing furnace. Oops, we'll fast forward here again. I'm not sure what they're doing here. Let's let the footage run for a little bit. Okay, here they're finishing off the cylinders, making sure the bottoms of the cylinders are squared off and true. He's got a big grinder there. Today, foundry procedures are such that there's probably not going to be too much of that type of hand finishing anymore. You can be exact enough that you'll probably get a finished product almost out of the mold and cut the riser off, and that'll be it. Let's see. Here's kind of a boring part of it, but once again, it's absolutely critical. Inspection of your product. These are actual finished cylinders that are ready to be assembled. You see the man over on the far left of the screen there with a box gauge. This is to make sure that they're dimensionally, there's another shot of them. Dimensionally, those cylinders are exactly right. If he can't put that box gauge around it, why, that cylinder is a reject and it goes back into the scrap pile for a future reheat. Okay, we're going to fast forward again. Okay, this is another part of the heat treating process. This is where there's more carbon put into the steel, the surface of the steel. That's carbon in some form that they're shoveling into those containers, and those are draft gear shoes in there. And this is the whole thing goes into a furnace again, and is heated up, and that carbon goes into the actual surface of the steel to improve the hardness. Kind of a neat forklift device there again.
Yeah.
And let's see what this is. I don't remember what we're looking at here. Must not be very interesting. Okay, this will be an interesting section where they're manufacturing the coil springs now for the draft gears. What's very hard to see there is they've got round spring stocks and they're crimping the end of it, and you'll see why it has to be crimped flat in just a minute. There's a lot of process in that crimping of the ends. In this section, they're actually starting to make springs. That's a red hot. That's a red hot bar there, and they put it in there into that mandrel, and you coil it around, and all of a sudden you have a spring.
Don't be touching that, folks.
No, you don't want to touch that.
Oh boy, they're working with bare hands.
See down in the lower right-hand corner.
Yes, I do.
I see them. They're quenching there. In a minute, you're going to get a close-up of why.
About what hell would be all about.
Here's why you needed the crimp in the end, so the hook there could grab the end of the steel. It wouldn't be able to grab a round piece of steel. So here, that's why you need the flat.
There it goes.
That's a good close-up of making a steel coil spring.
Wow. I'm sure before, even after we began today, people had no idea how huge these springs would have to be. And they quenched them in oil.
They quenched them in oil. This was not a water quench for the springs. It's an oil quench. Okay, let's fast forward here again. Okay, here they're testing those coil springs. And probably giving them a few pre-squeezes before they actually put them into the draft gear.
Yeah, they do that too, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's more footage of the plant, which we don't really need to see. This is kind of neat. This is on one of the overhead cranes, and this is the draft gear assembly area, going from one end of it to the other. When I first saw this movie, I was really taken back by how little had changed between 1928 and when I worked in there in the early 1960s. I could see some of the same equipment, remember some of the same equipment.
Really?
What did impress me, though, was in this movie the windows are a lot cleaner than they were when I was there.
At least there were windows.
Here's a whole bunch of A79 draft gear cylinders. I'm not sure we're at the assembly process yet or not, so we're going to fast forward through there. Okay, here we go. Here's the assembly process. The man drops the outer spring in the There, you'll see a little later, they also use an intercoil spring. Those are the shoes that he's putting in right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the man down on the end by the machine there will probably put the wedge in there. Okay, now he's locking those shoes into place for the moment. I don't want to fast forward at this point because it's too easy to lose the next step then in the assembly process. There's the intercoil spring being inserted.
Smaller, yes.
Mm-hmm. The movie is actually a little bit out of sequence here. But then again, we had to deal with what we had available. So they're putting the retaining bolt in there and also dropping the intercoil spring in there. But you notice that there are no shoes or anything in there at this point of the movie. But at least we've got it all on film, or in this case, a DVD.
It's so fortunate that this has survived, you know.
Mm-hmm. They're putting the shoes in. Like I say, it's a little bit out of sequence, but that's actually the way the film was shot. So,
9,000-pound drop hammers.
yeah. Well, that's kind of a little guy compared to what we use today. And that's how you work up the capacity on the draft gear a little bit. Get those parts to start creating friction along the mating surfaces. Like I say, that's kind of a little guy. Today we use a 27,000-pound
Oh, you
hammer.
do, huh?
Yeah. So
This three.
so 9,000 pounds. Nobody knew what to do with those a few years back when it was no longer an acceptable item to use. I guess they're all in the scrap bin, maybe making draft gear cylinders out of them now. Well, let's whoops, wrong button. Fast forward here and now you saw them putting that retaining bolt in there. Now they're riveting the top over after the nut went on there so that nut can't back off and have the draft gear come apart on you. That was the technology back then. Today the engineers design those clutch assemblies where the friction happens so that they kind of bayonet in and they lock each other up so you don't need that retaining bolt anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that retaining bolt is also another very definite source of potential maintenance problem because they tended to break. You didn't make those retaining bolts yourself. They were bought from somebody, and I think you weren't always too sure what kind of quality bolt you were going to get. So there's one more way to eliminate a source of breakage in your product. Just eliminate that part of it.
I don't know if he's
painting them right now. He's painting them. And I think we're just about at the end where we're going to see our draft gears go choo-chooing off into the sunset. Well, not quite. They got to load them up first, I guess, before we can go choo-choo off into the sunset. There we go.
Oh, cool. Different, very interesting engines there, huh?
Those look like they were electrics, possibly.
Electric driver wheels, yeah.
Although I don't see any overhead gantry. But who knows? They could have been dual function.
So you think that's up around Buffalo?
I have no idea where that is, but it probably was not at Buffalo. It's probably just some footage they stuck in there.
Oh, you think so? You don't think they checked to make sure they were miners before they...
I don't know whether they did or
Who
not.
knows? But there's some country that looks like that around Buffalo, so it could be.
So,
That is an amazing bunch of footage, though, isn't it cool?
yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And we are done.
I think that's just so interesting, David. This is a chronicle of history, adding chapters to my education and maybe educating people about miner for the first time. I realize that some parts of the things we're talking about are technical, but this is part of who the man was. And many of our viewers who did know who William Miner was thought, well, he built the school, and
Well, there was a lot more to the man than that.
And he built the farm, and he gave some money to people, and he...
Before all that, there was a very good engineer and a very astute businessman. And while all that, the rest of that was happening too, that part of it didn't change.
So, all of us hope to leave a legacy. Yours is inextricably intertwined with that of Miner, though, whether you like it or not,
It certainly is, I guess.
Well,
As long as we own the company now, because it's in the family.
Well, we
so.
got a couple of things that I want to wrap up with here. Tell me a little bit about your personal life, your education, and so on.
Well, I went to grade school and whatnot through basically the Hinsdale, Illinois school system. That's where we lived through high school. Then I went to the University of Michigan, where I majored in economics and business. So that's my educational background.
You're related to George Slauson. I had to mention that.
Yes, I am related to George Slauson. George is my brother-in-law. My wife Prudence and Connie Slauson are sisters. So that's where the family ties are up here.
We should have.
Their maiden names?
Yeah, what were their maiden
Their
names?
maiden names were Sweet.
Oh, I never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And they are.
Reverend Sweet was a Presbyterian minister here in the Shazy Church for a number of years before he retired, and at least he retired in that line of avocation. He became a professor up at the Miner Institute then.
Did he really?
Yeah, for a few years, and then curator at the LST Miner Museum after that.
I hope in the course of this program and others that we do that we inspire people somehow to learn more about the folks we're talking about. There are things you're still learning every day, I'm sure, about Mr. Miner.
Yes, there are.
You've as we've asked questions today, you've said, I don't know, maybe I'll read that or maybe I'll check up on that. There's so much to know. The man was prolific in so many ways and complicated personality, huh?
He was a complicated man who was probably stretched too thin. He needed about 6 more of himself to keep track of everything, I think.
But that's the way personalities like
But
that
that's
are. There's
the
never
way it
enough
is.
time to get done what you want
Right.
to accomplish.
Fortunately, he had some great people working for him through the years.
So, what's the future of your Miner enterprises?
Well, our future is not only with the railroad business. We continue to expand that area with new products, and we've actually purchased a couple of smaller companies to expand our product line. But we also have our own internal research, and we spun off a couple of our product lines from railroad-oriented to more industrial-oriented.
Really?
And those companies are doing fine. So that's kind of the future. We'll keep going and expand as best we can where we can.
we appreciate you inviting us into this wonderful old boathouse slash summer home to show us all this history, starting out with the concrete docking facility that they drove the Alice's into way back when, and bringing us right up to 2004. And we hope to talk to you again, David Withall. Thanks so much for inviting us in today.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to do it.
Enjoyed it thoroughly. Be careful. When are you going home?
I'll be going home again next week. So, got to get it back to the work again and nose to the grindstone at that point.
It's almost not fair.
Well, I know it, but I'll have had my chance at seeing the fall color this year and trying to find that perfect tree.
Well, you know, we got so many perfect trees within.
I know, it's just a question of which one is going to be the perfect one this year. So.
I love it. Thanks again. Who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.